Welcome to the Hauntline. Tonight, we peer through the veil into a home where dream and nightmare become one. Have you ever felt a presence in an empty room? A chill that settles not just on your skin, but deep within your bones? Imagine finding the perfect house, a sanctuary for your family, only to discover its previous occupant never truly left and has no intention of welcoming you. This is the story of the Holloway family and the uninvited tenant who turned their aspirations into a terrifying reality. It began, as these things often do, with a dream. For Liam and Sarah Holloway and their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, number 17, Blackwood Lane, was that dream made manifest. A charming Victorian, a little rough around the edges perhaps, but with what the estate agent called good bones and a sprawling garden that promised endless summer adventures for Lily. They'd poured every penny, every ounce of hope into this house. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the future they'd meticulously planned. The previous owner, a recluse named Mr. Abernathy, had passed away within its walls. A quiet end to a quiet life, they were told. The neighbors, when pressed, offered little more than tight-lipped shrugs and vague warnings about the house being unlucky or holding on to things. Such pronouncements were easily dismissed by Liam, a software engineer with a mind for logic, as small-town superstition. Sarah, an artist with a more intuitive nature, felt a faint tremor of unease during the final walkthrough, a fleeting coldness in the upstairs hallway, a sense that they were being watched. But she'd chalked it up to the house's age and her own anxieties about the monumental change. Their first night was filled with the chaotic symphony of unpacking. Boxes littered every room like fallen monuments. Liam, ever practical, was already mapping out electrical outlets, while Sarah envisioned color palettes for each space. Lily, clutching her worn teddy bear, Barnaby, explored her new room, her initial shyness quickly giving way to excitement. That night, as a sliver of moonlight cut across Lily's still unpacked room, Sarah tucked her in. "Mommy," Lily whispered, her eyes wide in the dim light. The old man in the corner says hello. Sarah froze, her heart giving a sudden, sharp thump. "Old man, sweetie? There's no one here but us." Lily pointed a small finger towards the darkest corner of the room, where shadows coalesced. "He was there. He waved. He said he likes my bear." Sarah forced a smile, her gaze darting to the empty corner. Must have been a dream, sleepyhead. Just the shadows playing tricks. She kissed Lily's forehead, the skin surprisingly cool beneath her lips. But as she walked down the creaking hallway, the image of that dark corner and Lily's unwavering certainty lingered like a splinter in her mind. It was the first discordant note in the symphony of their new life, a whisper that hinted at something unseen, something already home. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Paint fumes mingled with the scent of brewing coffee. Furniture was arranged and rearranged. The house slowly began to feel like theirs. Slowly. Liam, whistling off-key, was fixing a loose floorboard in the living room. He reached for his hammer, which he'd placed right beside him, only to find it missing. "Sarah, did you grab my hammer?" he called out. "No, love, I'm upstairs," she replied, her voice muffled. He frowned, patting the floor around him. He stood, scanned the room, Nothing. Muttering to himself, he went to the toolbox in the hallway. There it was, nestled right on top. "Huh," he murmured. "Swear I left it in here." He dismissed it. Stress. Too many things on his mind. Sarah experienced it too. Her favorite sketchbook, always kept on the antique writing desk in the sunroom, would inexplicably turn up in the kitchen. Once, she found it tucked beneath a pile of tea towels. Keys, meticulously placed in a ceramic bowl by the door, would vanish, only to reappear hours later in the most obvious of places, or sometimes the most illogical, like inside the refrigerator. "This house," she'd said to Liam one evening, a nervous laugh barely masking her concern, "it's like it has a sense of humor. A very, very strange sense of humor." Liam, scrolling through his phone, offered a distracted, "It's an old house, Sarah. Things settle. We're still learning its quirks." But these weren't just quirks. There were the cold spots too. Not just drafts, but pockets of unnerving, unnatural chill that would materialize suddenly in the warmest rooms, raising goosebumps on their arms before vanishing as quickly as they came. And the sounds, faint whispers that seemed to slither just beneath the threshold of hearing, the distinct impression of footsteps in empty hallways, the soft, almost mournful sigh that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves when the house was otherwise silent. Lily, however, seemed untroubled. She'd often be found in her room or in the dusty attic they hadn't yet cleared, chattering away to her friend. "Mr. Grumbles doesn't like the yellow paint in the kitchen, Mommy," she announced one afternoon, meticulously coloring in her book. Sarah paused, mid-stir of the risotto. "Mr. Grumbles? Is that your new imaginary friend, sweetie?" Lily nodded. "He lived here before. He says the kitchen used to be blue, his favorite blue." Sarah felt that familiar chill, despite the warmth of the stove. The estate agent had mentioned the previous owner, Mr. Abernathy, had been in the house for over 50 years. She hadn't asked about his favorite colors. How could Lily possibly know that? "Well," Sarah said, her voice a little tighter than she intended, "Mr. Grumbles will just have to get used to the yellow." Lily looked up, her expression serious. "He says he doesn't have to do anything." Liam remained the steadfast skeptic, offering logical, if sometimes strained, explanations. The house is settling, the sounds are the old pipes. Lily has a vivid imagination. It's a big change for her too, you know, but even his certainty began to fray at the edges. One evening, as they were watching television, the remote, resting on the arm of the sofa between them, suddenly skittered across the cushion and clattered to the floor, as if swiped by an unseen hand. They both stared at it. "Static electricity?" Liam offered, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Sarah didn't reply. She just wrapped her arms around herself, a shiver tracing its way down her spine. The air in the room had dropped several degrees. The settling-in period was over. Something was making its presence known, and it didn't seem to appreciate the new decor, or the new tenants. The playful nudges, the misplaced items, they were just the overture. The true performance was about to begin, and it was clear this entity, this Mr. Grumbles, as Lily called him, was not content with being a silent observer. Doors began to slam shut with startling force, even on still, windless days. Cupboard doors in the kitchen would swing open, their contents sometimes spilling onto the floor. Sarah would meticulously clean, only to find muddy footprints, too large to be Lily's, appearing on the freshly mopped kitchen tiles moments later, leading from nowhere to nowhere. Liam, struggling to reconcile these events with his rational worldview, found himself meticulously checking window latches, door locks, looking for drafts, for any logical cause. He'd find none. His frustration grew, not just at the unexplained events, but at the creeping fear he saw in Sarah's eyes, the way Lily would sometimes stop mid-sentence and stare at an empty space, a flicker of unease in her own. One evening, Sarah was in the bathroom, getting ready for bed. As she reached for her toothbrush, she saw it, reflected in the steamy mirror, a fleeting, shadowy figure standing in the hallway behind her. Her breath hitched. She spun around. Nothing. Just the empty, dimly lit corridor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Liam!" she called out, her voice trembling. He appeared at the end of the hall, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" I thought I saw someone in the hallway." Liam walked towards her, his gaze sweeping the corridor. "There's no one here, Sarah." He tried to sound reassuring, but she could hear the strain. "It was tall," she whispered, "and dark, just for a second." He put his arms around her. "You're tired. We're all on edge." But later that night, as Sarah lay in bed, feigning sleep, she heard it. The distinct, rhythmic creak of the old rocking chair in Lily's room, the one they'd moved to the attic because Lily said Mr. Grumbles didn't like it near her bed. It was moving, back and forth, back and forth. The strain began to tell on their relationship. Arguments, short and sharp, erupted over things that once wouldn't have mattered. Liam accused Sarah of being overly anxious, of letting her imagination run wild. Sarah, in turn, felt frustrated by his refusal to acknowledge what felt so undeniably real to her. "There's something in this house, Liam," she'd insisted, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and anger. "And it's not friendly." "It's an old house, Sarah! There are going to be noises, weird occurrences. We can't just jump to ghosts every time a door creaks," he'd retort, his own fear manifesting as defensive anger. Lily, meanwhile, seemed to be forging a deeper, more unsettling connection with Mr. Grumbles. She'd relay messages, facts about the house, about its previous inhabitants, things she couldn't possibly know. "Mr. Grumbles says he used to hide his sweets in the loose floorboard under his bed," Lily said casually one breakfast. Liam and Sarah exchanged a look. The master bedroom, Abernathy's old room, had a notoriously loose board they'd planned to fix. Later that day, driven by a morbid curiosity, Liam pried it open. Tucked deep in the dusty cavity was a small, tarnished tin box. Inside, wrapped in yellowed wax paper, were 3 impossibly old petrified barley sugar sweets. Liam didn't mention the sweets to Sarah immediately. He couldn't. It was a crack in the very foundation of his understanding of the world. He sat on the edge of their bed, the dusty tin in his hands, the silence of the room heavy, oppressive. The house seemed to be watching him, waiting. The echoes in the walls were no longer just sounds. They were communications, demands, and the possessiveness of Mr. Abernathy, or whatever he now was becoming chillingly clear. He didn't just want his sweets, he wanted his house. And he didn't like sharing. The unseen tenant was no longer content with subtle manipulations. The line between eerie suggestion and overt aggression was crossed, not with a whisper, but with a chilling physical assertion. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Lily was playing in her room, her laughter echoing softly down the hallway. Sarah was in the kitchen, trying to find solace in the mundane rhythm of preparing dinner. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the house. "Lily!" Sarah cried, dropping the knife she was holding, which clattered loudly on the counter. She raced upstairs, her heart pounding in her ears. She found Lily huddled in the corner of her room, tears streaming down her face, pointing a trembling finger at her collection of dolls on the shelf. They were all facing the wall, every single one. "He did it, Mommy," Lily sobbed. "Mr. Grumbles, he was angry. He shouted." "Shouted what, baby?" Sarah asked, pulling Lily into her arms, scanning the room, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. He said I'm not allowed to play with his things. He said the room is his." As Sarah comforted Lily, she felt it, a frigid blast of air, even though the window was closed. And then a stinging sensation on her arm. She looked down. 3 angry red welts were rising on her skin, like the marks of invisible fingers. That night, Sarah showed Liam her arm. The marks were still visible, angry and undeniable. "This isn't settling, Liam," she said, her voice low and intense. "This isn't imagination. It touched me. It hurt Lily." Liam stared at the marks, his face pale. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a grim, dawning horror. The sweets in the tin box, Lily's impossible knowledge, the escalating events. They formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," he said, his voice barely a whisper. They started researching. Local historical archives, old newspaper clippings. Mr. Silas Abernathy. A solitary man, intensely private, known for his fierce attachment to his property. He'd inherited the house from his mother and lived there his entire life. Died there, in his armchair, in the living room. There were no stories of violence, no dark secrets unearthed, just a profound, almost obsessive love for his home. A love that, it seemed, transcended death itself. The activity intensified. Objects didn't just move, they flew. One evening, as Liam was walking past the living room, Abernathy's old armchair, which they'd kept, began to rock violently on its own. Then, a heavy book launched itself from a nearby shelf, narrowly missing his head. Sleep became a luxury. Every creak, every shadow, sent jolts of adrenaline through them. They started sleeping in the same room as Lily, a temporary mattress on the floor, feeling like besieged soldiers in a war they didn't understand. Sarah, drawing on her more spiritual inclinations, tried leaving offerings. A glass of brandy, which Abernathy was rumored to enjoy, some of Lily's drawings to appease him. The brandy would evaporate at an unnatural rate, the glass sometimes found empty mere hours later. The drawings would be shredded or found crumpled in a corner. One night, Liam woke to a suffocating pressure on his chest. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. His eyes darted around the darkened room. A shadowy mass, vaguely human-shaped, was pressing down on him. He could feel an icy coldness emanating from it, a malevolence that stole the air from his lungs. Panic surged. He tried to cry out, but only a strangled gasp escaped. Suddenly, Lily whimpered in her sleep. The pressure vanished. Liam gasped for air, sitting bolt upright, trembling. The room was empty, still, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. The entity was staking its claim, not just on the house, but on them. It was no longer just an uninvited tenant. It was a possessor, and its patience was wearing thin. They were no longer just living in a haunted house. They were being actively, physically tormented. The question was no longer what it wanted, but how far it would go to get it. The escalating terror had pushed the Holloway family to their breaking point. The dream home had become a prison, their lives governed by the whims of a possessive, increasingly hostile spirit. Researching local folklore and spiritual practices, Sarah stumbled upon an old, almost forgotten ritual. A rite of cleansing and reclaiming, intended not to banish, but to respectfully assert one's own right to a space, acknowledging the past while claiming the present. It was a long shot, steeped in mystical tradition far removed from their ordinary lives, but they were desperate. The ritual required them to gather in the heart of the home, the living room where Abernathy had spent most of his time and where he had died. They needed items representing their life there. A family photograph, one of Lily's favorite drawings, soil from the garden they'd lovingly tended. And crucially, an offering of peace, something Abernathy himself had cherished. They chose one of his old, leather-bound books of poetry they'd found in the attic, alongside a small, hand-carved wooden bird he'd apparently made. The night they chose was heavy, the air thick with an almost palpable tension. A storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within. As they gathered in the living room, lit only by flickering candlelight, the temperature plummeted. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, to writhe. Lily, clutching Barnaby, stayed close between her parents, her eyes wide but surprisingly calm. "Okay," Liam said, his voice hoarse, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "Sarah, you remember the words?" Sarah nodded, her hands trembling as she held a small, handwritten piece of paper. "We say this for you, Mr. Abernathy. We mean no disrespect. We understand this was your home. But it is our home now. We wish to live here in peace." As she began to speak the words of the ritual, simple, earnest phrases about shared space and mutual respect, the room erupted. The candles extinguished simultaneously, plunging them into darkness, save for the flashes of lightning outside. Books flew from the shelves, pictures crashed from the walls. Abernathy's armchair began to rock with violent fury, slamming against the floor. A terrifying guttural roar filled the room, a sound of pure rage and anguish. Lily screamed. Liam threw himself protectively over her, shouting for Sarah to keep going. "We offer these in peace," Sarah cried out, her voice nearly drowned by the maelstrom. She fumbled in the dark, placing their offerings and Abernathy's book and bird on the hearth. "We honor your memory, but we claim this space for our family, for love, for life." Suddenly, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the room. For a terrifying instant they saw him, a towering, spectral figure coalesced from shadow and rage, standing by the fireplace, its translucent hand reaching for the offerings. Its face was contorted in a silent scream, eyes burning with an ethereal, sorrowful light. It wasn't just anger they saw, but a profound, aching loneliness. a desperate, possessive attachment to the only world it had ever known. In that moment of frozen terror, Lily, small and brave, wriggled from Liam's grasp. "Mr. Grumbles," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "It's okay. We can share. You don't have to be lonely anymore." She held out Barnaby, her most treasured possession. "You can hold Barnaby if you like. He's very good at listening." The spectral figure wavered, its burning eyes fixed on Lily, then on the worn teddy bear. The rage in its form seemed to soften, replaced by an almost visible wave of confusion, then sorrow. The oppressive cold in the room lessened, almost imperceptibly. The violent energy subsided. Then, as another, softer rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, the figure slowly, almost reluctantly, began to dissipate. It didn't vanish in a flash, but rather faded, like smoke caught in a gentle breeze, until only the scent of old books and a faint, lingering chill remained. Silence descended, broken only by their ragged breaths and Lily's soft sniffles. The candles on the mantelpiece flickered back to life, one by one, their flames burning steadily. The confrontation was over. But what had truly happened? Had they appeased him? Banished him? Or had a lonely spirit, confronted not with aggression, but with a child's innocent empathy, simply chosen to let go? In the days and weeks that followed, the house on Blackwood Lane was different. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, like a fever breaking. The inexplicable cold spots vanished. Objects stayed where they were placed. The silence of the night was just that. Silence, no longer punctuated by unseen footsteps or mournful sighs. Liam and Sarah found themselves breathing easier, the constant tension slowly seeping from their shoulders. They repaired the minor damage from that terrifying night, repainted walls, and tried to reclaim the sense of hope they'd first felt for their home. Lily no longer spoke of Mr. Grumbles. When asked, she'd simply say, "He's gone to sleep now." But was he truly gone? Or merely dormant, appeased by a child's offering and a family's reluctant stand? Sometimes, late at night, when the house was still, Sarah would think she felt a flicker of that old awareness, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air, like a forgotten memory brushing against the edge of her consciousness. Liam, too, would occasionally pause, listening to the quiet, a thoughtful, uncertain expression on his face. They never found the little wooden bird or Abernathy's poetry book on the hearth again after that night. They simply weren't there the next morning, despite the other items remaining untouched. Perhaps, in some unseen realm, Mr. Abernathy had accepted their peace offering. Or perhaps it was a sign that the veil between their world and his, once violently torn, had now been respectfully, if not entirely, mended. The house on Blackwood Lane became their home, truly their home. They lived there for many more years, raising Lily, filling its rooms with laughter and life. The fear faded, replaced by a quiet respect for the unseen, a deeper understanding that some places hold echoes of those who came before, echoes that sometimes, just sometimes, demand to be heard. The uninvited tenant was gone, but his shadow, the memory of his sorrowful, possessive spirit, lingered, not as a threat, but as a reminder. a reminder that the walls around us can hold more than just memories. They can hold souls, waiting for acknowledgement, for understanding, or perhaps just for a kind word from a child and the comfort of a borrowed teddy bear. The veil between our world and the next is often thinner than we imagine. Sometimes it's a whisper in an empty room, a chill on a summer's day, or, as the Holloways discovered, a presence that refuses to relinquish its claim. What makes a spirit cling so fiercely to a place? Is it unfinished business, a profound love, or simply an inability to let go of the familiar? The answers, like the spirits themselves, often remain elusive, hidden in the shadows. Thank you for joining us on the Hauntline. If this tale of the uninvited tenant sent a shiver down your spine, please consider sharing it with a fellow seeker of the strange and unexplained. Don't forget to like this episode if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the Hauntline for more journeys into the eerie and the unknown. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next story. We have many more unsettling tales waiting to be told. Until next time, listen closely to the silence. You never know who or what might be listening back.